the way I think people think. It's like nowadays, when you say AI, most people think Gen AI, Transformers, things like that.
Mhm.
And there was a little bit of that, but the really cool part was a lot of it was more machine learning. And there are a lot of studios that have been using machine learning based tools in their pipeline for a while now. It looks like projects are happening, right? It looks like work is at least being thought about. So hopefully that
Right.
means maybe in 6 months we'll see kind of an upswing in job availability. I think
Oh,
folks in the game industry need to maybe take a little more serious and say, wait, how did you guys handle this? Like, and I know somebody's gonna say, yeah, well, look what's going on in VFX, because VFX is taking a beating too. But like I said, I think there's just a lot of things about how VFX production and CG production is done and thought about. Like I said, from a standards, perspective, for example, that I think would be very helpful for the games industry. So
cool. Welcome to the show. Today I have Seth Gibson on with me. Seth, I've known Seth for a long time. We met first back in, I think, in 2012.
yep.
And some of Seth's experience includes senior solutions engineer at Unity, gameplay engineer at Facebook, senior software engineer at HTC Creative Labs, software engineer at Intel, Samsung, Riot Games, Microsoft. Like, you've had this long list of a pretty epic career. And yeah, I appreciate you coming on and spending some time with me today.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Yeah, no, I think this is a great thing you're doing, something I think the industry really needs. So yeah, man.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's see. So we met in 2012. I was working at Digital Domain at the time, and I seem to remember they wanted to have a muscle system
Mhm.
developed, and you were working with part of a software development team at the time,
Yep.
and you guys came in, and I remember you walked in, and you're this giant, like, powerlifting brick wall of a human being, and I was like, oh, that dude looks pretty cool and kind of intimidating.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's usually my calling card. I remember, was it like in February? I went out to Boston because the group I work for now is completely remote, so we're all on Zoom. And I think that was like the first thing I heard from everyone was like, "Wow, you're a lot bigger in real life than you are on Zoom." I was like, "Yeah, I get it." I'm not sure how to answer that, so I'm like, "Yeah, I guess so. Thanks." I work at
Yeah.
it, so.
Yeah, and aside from all your badass like CG video game related stuff, you've done uh, combat sports, you've fought in Muay Thai,
Yep.
Jiu-Jitsu, you train at 10th Planet, I think, right? Is
I sorta. So I used to. Just recently, a really good friend of mine who was also 10th Planet connected with another gym here in Utah and started teaching there. So I'm still adjacent to 10th Planet. I mean, I go back to Seattle. I try to go back to anytime I travel, if there's a 10th Planet in town, I try to drop in. But yeah, I'm actually training day in and day out with a group in uh, not really southern Utah, but south of Salt Lake, called Corvus. But it's all no gi still, so a lot of
oh,
wrestling
right on.
based stuff, a lot of yeah, and we use some of the 10th Planet stuff. So he's locked down and all that good stuff. So yeah,
Man, I feel like I guess I'll just roll right into that stuff because I have all sorts of questions for you, but I do jujitsu as well. I'm
yeah.
not probably at the level you are, but is there, when you're doing like a training at a no-gi gym like that, is there, and for anyone who's listening, no-gi means, so traditional jujitsu, you wear a gi, which is like the kind of like the robe style kimono, and there's all sorts of grips, and you have lots of collar grips and collar chokes and things like that. And you could grip on the sleeves, but whereas no gi, you're just wearing like a rash guard and some shorts. So it's almost more of like a wrestling style. There's just kind of grabbing on the back of the neck or trying
Yeah.
to grab under hooks and things like that. So
So
is there like a belt system for
yeah,
no gi?
most of the no-gi places, I mean, and even 10th Planet is the same way. It follows the pretty standard progression. So, white, blue, purple, brown, black. A lot of the 10th Planets I've trained at don't do stripes. It's just, you just kind of get your belt, and you get your belt and then you hang on to it for a bit. But yeah, so
Uh-huh.
we definitely do.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah. I guess I should probably steer back to CG first, and then maybe we could touch
Mhm.
back on the cool athletic stuff
Sure.
after. You've been working with Unity for quite a while. Can you talk about maybe some of the stuff you've been doing with over at Unity and some of the stuff you've been pushing over there?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because my Unity experience was never really games. So I really got deep into Unity when I started at Intel, and that was a funny story because the girl who brought me on at Intel was somebody I'd met through TechArtist.org years and years ago. And she was asking me all these questions about Unity, and I kind of I was like, what are you guys doing with Unity at Intel? I know you don't make games, and I know you're not part of, the optimization team, who would be, because Intel and a lot of those companies have groups of people that work specifically with Unity and Unreal and in Maya, even just to optimize for the hardware. And so she was like, "Why don't you come over and check out what we're doing?" And it turned out that it was a group that was doing, I guess we'll call it like future of human computer interaction stuff. So what would a UI look and act like if it were fully 3D, for example, and you were using things like gesture recognition and all that good stuff. I mean, if you think about Minority Report, for example, like that was kind of one of the things that we always had on the wall, and John Underkoffler and Oblong Industries, all those things. But yeah, and it was cool because that experience when Unity was looking to stand up there, what we called at the time the industrial verticals business org. So all the non-game stuff, so automotive, aerospace, defense, AEC. It was kind of neat because I had that sort of experience already, and so that's what I ended up doing at Unity. Was they brought me on kind of in the early days of that, and when I started, I was mainly automotive focused, so things like virtual design, even HMI, a lot of that, kind of full spectrum, and even like research and development, because so I worked with a lot of different groups, and then as time went on, we kind of expanded into other verticals. So, went from automotive into, aerospace. I think I can say that I worked with Boeing, for example, as one of my clients.
That's crazy.
A lot of defense companies, and so yeah, and it's interesting because they were doing a lot of stuff that is sort of adjacent to what goes on in games. Like I think one of the neat things I heard was, if you think about like a virtual simulator, right, or an education trainer, there's really not much difference between that and a game, other than maybe the goal is a little different, right? So it's like entertainment versus education, but all the boilerplate, all the content, everything, all the interaction models are pretty much the same thing. So yeah, and so that's what I did at Unity for probably 4 or 5 years. I was just working with a lot of those companies to help them stand up Unity based processes, to help them optimize, do a lot of training, demos, support. So yeah, fun stuff.
That's nuts. So your background is in like traditional like software development, or what would you say you're?
Yeah, that's a good question because so when I started in college, I actually went in as a music ed major, and because the school I went to was a really tiny school that sort of had comp sci and animation, but not really. It was one of those things you could do as an independent study. And so you just had to like declare and then get into this special program that would let you kind of build your curriculum. And then at some point, I transferred to the University of Washington, and it was kind of the same thing. At the time, they had a very kind of small program called Grail, which is it's like graphics research and interaction lab or something like that. And so it was more of an experimental. Like it wasn't really focused on games or film specifically. It was more like let's just do cool things with computer graphics and whatever happens happens. And it was an offshoot of the comp sci school, so I had to you had to get in first, then you had to like be accepted to the comp sci school, and then eventually you could get into that program. And so didn't do too well there either because I'm not really a math guy. I'm not really an academics guy, to be honest. And then so I ended up going to this school in Seattle that sadly closed down a long time ago called Mesmer Animation Labs, which was basically like it was kind of an authorized training center for date myself horribly. I'll say Alias, Softimage before they were, So yeah, we used
SGI
SGI.
days.
Yeah, we actually used SGIs. It was great. I think it was the tail end. So we had a Windows NT lab, and again dating myself horribly, and an SGI lab. But yeah, and so from there, I had actually gone into that program because I was interested in actually being an animator. And so I did some, I went through that whole curriculum, and it's funny. I'm one of the instructors there who, he had a lot of industry experience already, and he was kind of watching everybody. And we did this one tutorial. I don't, you've been, I mean, you're the same ilk as I am. You remember that Alias tutorial, Salty the Seal?
Yes, dude.
Yeah. So it had the
Those nerve spheres that make like a
yeah,
seal.
yeah, yeah.
Totally.
So we were going through that, and one of the Mel scripts was broken. One of the expressions was broken. So I was like, so I knew enough programming. Like, I mean, I was one of those kids that like, was writing basic code when, he was like 6 years old and super nerd. So I'm like, okay, I have to fix this. And so eventually I figured it out. And so what the instructor said was a guy named Paul Lewis. Hope you're out there. So Paul, you're a good guy. But he said, so I'm going to be honest with you. You're not a great artist. You kind of get animation, but you're not great at it. You don't really have the training, but you're really good at solving problems. So he said, you should be a technical artist. And I'd never heard that term before, but I was like, all right, well, this guy's been in the, I mean, and he was like, super old school ILM, I mean, he worked on, all the kind of in the glory days, right? And so I was like, all right, well, I'll look into that and kind of do it. And that's actually sort of how I got into the industry because I got hired at a small company in Kirkland, Washington, that again is also not around anymore as a VFX guy, but mainly because I knew how to write a little bit of code and I was familiar with kind of like the guts of Maya. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, you're the guy that understands what all the numbers in the UI do. I'm like, yeah, I'm that guy. And so I started off doing particle effects, but then same thing happened. I was writing a tool for myself, and one of the animators kind of noticed that I could do that. And he's like, oh, I've always wanted to build custom rigging tools, and this was back 2002. So
Oh,
there weren't a
wow.
ton of there wasn't a ton of that going on in games. Like I think, but at the time, shout out to the folks at Naughty Dog. They had published this GDC, well, not GDC, sorry, as in Game Developer Mag, if you remember that. And they'd actually they had stood up their own sort of not really automatic rigging tool, but it was artist driven, so it had this whole UI and there was a sequence of things you did, and then it would build you a rig. And so we were like, oh, we should do something like that. And so that was kind of how I got into technical art, TD work, and yeah, and then sort of I became that studio's first real technical artist, and then that's just kind of what I built my career on is yeah, being the guy who knows like what like I love that like what all the weird numbers in the UI do. So yeah.
Man, guys like you were super rare at that time. I feel like maybe you'd go to SIGGRAPH and you'd see a couple cool demos. I remember like the pod race demo with
Mm,
Habib
yeah.
Zadapour, I think was his
Yep.
name.
Yep.
But yeah, like using some Maya expressions. I don't know what they really did behind the scenes, but I remember just seeing that being blown away. Like, what, you could do this? Like, no one's talking about this.
Mhm.
Um, that's awesome that you were into that back then. Uh, since you've been doing that for so long, like, in your opinion, has rigging changed all that much since those days?
Yeah, I think so. I think, back in the day, I mean, obviously it was kind of a wild west because, there weren't we didn't have like ideas that we knew about. Like, for example, I mean, we did, but everybody kind of did them their own way. So, for example, let's think about something like IKFK switching. Nowadays, it's just like, oh,
Hmm.
yeah, we know how to do that. But back then, it was kind of like, you could go to like five different animators because at the time, like a lot of animators were building their own rigs, and you would see five different ways of doing that. Like some people would say, oh, yeah, mine is driven key like based and oh no, mine's I kind of cobbled together a mail script to do it. No, mine is all
Hmm.
like constraints with driving blends, and so I think now there's definitely a lot of best practices. I mean, I think a great proof point there is you look at Unreal 5.4. They have actually not just animation tools but modular rigging tools in the
Right.
engine, which is like so I think that to me says that the knowledge base has definitely come far enough that we can say, okay, this is something that we have standards and practices for. We have BKPs. We know how to do this. So let's actually take this, kind of bake it down into a system like that, and ship it to the world versus like every studio kind of having their own way they do things, which you still see. I mean, and you probably know this too, because
Yeah.
yeah, because you're going to get into those productions where it's like, no, no, we need to do this thing this way. And but at the same time, I think yeah, there's enough of a, I guess, that Venn diagram where it's like, yeah, yeah, no, no, there's all this work here that we know kind of just from experience that we can do with these solutions. So yeah, so and I think a lot of that, like you said, back in the day, there weren't a whole lot of technical artists, and there really weren't. I mean, we all kind of knew each other. We had a really techartist.org, for example, was really small. There were probably 20 of us on it. And we all talked all the time, and so I think it was really cool that being able to be that open because we looked at mail scripts and art tools kind of differently than engine code. It was like, well, yeah, of course I sent it to my friend at whatever studio. It's just a mail script. He was going to write it anyway. So um,
Right.
so yeah, so I think that really helped him, and I think that's one of the things that really is unique about tech art and TDs that I personally really loved about being part of it. So
That's awesome. Yeah, I've noticed like when you the studios I've even worked at recently, if you're working in Maya, let's say, everything's going to be done their own way. Like every rigging system is built their own way. But it's cool that Unreal is incorporating like the control rig system in there, and it is kind of unified. So I was talking with a friend of mine at Epic Games, and he's working on Fortnite, and he's like, "Yeah, we just do our skid weights in Maya, let's say, but then everything else is done in Engine. All the rigging, it's
mm,
all the same stuff that everybody else can use that's out there. There's nothing proprietary, and I think it's cool that um, you're not reinventing the wheel every time when if you
Yeah.
need to get in there and do that, whereas for some reason at other studios are like, no, we got to write our own puppet rig and we need to write our own, you know, that's like, why are we doing, why are we doing
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, and like I said, I think, and it's kind of cool that people that those systems still are, like I said, customizable enough that, like I said, you don't have to build it from scratch anymore. You can just grab something off the shelf, and then a lot of them are open enough that you can tweak. So it's such a great force multiplier, and I think that's the kind of thing that really drives innovation, right? Is like, well, no, we can just get to the stuff that is cool, that our special kind of our special sauce right away, versus having to feed and maintain and care for this other beast, right? So
Totally. So, were you at SIGGRAPH this week or?
yeah, yeah. Actually, I went out there Friday, and this was the first time I actually got to do the pre-cons like DigiPro and open source days, and that was great. And so yeah, and then I was on the floor Tuesday, mainly just doing meetings at the booth and stuff. And yeah, it was cool. It's funny because I think the last SIGGRAPH I went to was Anaheim many years ago, and so yeah. And then on top of that, I've kind of been out of real production since like 2012. So to kind of see like what the industry has been up to was just, it's like, wow, this is so cool. Like, so yeah.
Yeah, was there a lot of like AI driven tech there or like
There
smaller
was, but
things?
not really the way I think people think. It's like nowadays, when you say AI, most people think Gen AI, transformers, things like that.
Hmm.
And there was a little bit of that, but the really cool part was a lot of it was more machine learning, and there are a lot of studios that have been using machine learning based tools in their pipeline for a while now. And so I thought that was really cool, that that people are actually saying, okay, rather than try and make Gen AI or transformers kind of like the shotgun problem solve, it's like, well, what's a specific place we can use, maybe like some kind of a classifier or some sort of machine learning based thing to really kind of solve a specific problem that, then we can also art direct really well, that we can build tools on top of. So I thought that was really cool. And I think the other big focus, which makes sense given how production is scaled, was cloud. So people using either cloud-based solutions for storage or for media asset management or for even for production tracking, or things like just to build like the studio in a cloud, right? It's like your studio is basically, or your artist machine is basically just like a Kubernetes container that you spin up, and then when you onboard a new artist, they just kind of log into that and go, and then when they leave, you just spin it back down. And so yeah, so
That's
cloud,
crazy.
yeah. So I'd say everything from that to like AWS based render farms and job farms, which again makes sense, because rather than having to pay to maintain this farm that you may not be using, it's like, yeah, you spin up and down CPU and GPU as you need it, and hopefully save costs. So yeah.
Yeah. Was there like any sense while you're out there, like what's going on in the industry as far as like jobs and things like that? I don't know, I'm experiencing it now myself. There's like a
Mhm.
lull in hire. I don't know. It seems like a lot of people I know are kind of out of work.
Mhm.
And do you have any thoughts on that or like what's going on or?
Yeah. I do. So I didn't get a big sense of that at the show, but to that, the show was very small. So I
Mhm.
mean, especially compared to like one of the LA shows, or even the Anaheim show. Um, because and our booth, we do, so the company I'm at now, Backlight, we do a pretty specific thing. We do production tracking and asset management, and we had a lot of meetings with bigger companies. So to us, it's like, I guess I can't really use that to speak to the state of jobs, but I can say, well, it looks like projects are happening, right? It looks like work is at least being thought about. So hopefully that
Right.
maybe in 6 months we'll see kind of an upswing in job availability.
Yeah.
But as far as what's going on, I think it's a couple things. One, I think it's that people really made some bets back during the pandemic that just didn't pay off. I mean, I think a lot of people kind of got a little comfortable with the idea of the new normal, and now that we're kind of back to the old normal, it's like, oh, wait a minute, we just don't need this. Like, oh, so I could use Unity as an example. Unity really bet big on things like the metaverse and virtual, just everything being virtual, because obviously we couldn't be in person.
Right.
And when things started to go back to normal, all of a sudden, a lot of the companies that they'd been working with were like, "Oh yeah, actually, we don't need to make quite as big an investment as that as we thought. So we're going to scale back a bit." Um,
Interesting.
so that's I think that's part of it. But then the other part, and I can't really speak too much to film and VFX, but in games, I think it's just that productions have really scaled, and in games they're really, I'm trying to like be really careful about how I say this.
Sure.
Um, I think there were lessons that haven't been learned about how to scale production. So great example. So when you go to SIGGRAPH, right, you see, and you're sitting in some of these talks, you hear about all the open standards they have, Open Color IO, Open Timeline IO, for example, Open RB, even things like the VFX reference platform, right? I was thinking, they don't really have something like that in games, do they? Like, there's like at least, if there is, I don't know about it, but I've never heard about like an industry accepted game development reference platform, right?
Right.
Um, and then yeah, the question, like or even standards, it's like, I mean, other than engines like say Unity or Unreal, which are kind of standards because obviously they're a central tech. Yeah, like I was like, yeah, we don't have things like Open Color IO. We don't have things like these kind of industry like maintained and developed projects. And I know there are some, but I was trying to think about any that maybe had gone full bore as far as game adoption. I couldn't really think of anything. So I think that's the big problem too, is like just not learning how to scale production in a way that was sustainable. You hear about game studios now that at one point were 1,300 people for one project, and then they had to like drop back to half of that because all of a sudden none of this paid off, and we brought all these people on because we needed that many people to build these super high res assets and and just all that stuff. And yeah, and like I said, I think there are lessons that could have been learned, and I think still should be learned from what's been going on in film and VFX, especially now that development is it's starting to converge a lot, right? That I think
Oh,
folks in the
totally.
game industry need to maybe take a little more serious and say, wait, how did you guys handle this? Like, and I know somebody's gonna say, yeah, well, look what's going on in VFX, because VFX is taking a beating too. But like I said, I think there's just a lot of things about how VFX production and CG production is done and thought about, like I said, from a standards perspective, for example, that I think would be very helpful for the games industry. So
Interesting. Yeah, I wonder if it's because like the way game studios are run, like they're so interested in owning every little bit of IP they
mhm.
can, and they're
Yeah,
not willing to share.
I think that's a lot of it. And then I think another thing that kind of hurts game studios is again, when you think about these giant studios, like having to carry around the weight of that many full time employees. And I know some people are probably going to balk at this, but I think there's a world where maybe you don't treat contractors as second class citizens, and
Right.
you actually like you understand that, like, no, this is just part of how we do business, and we're going to take care of these people so people aren't so reticent to do it. And then yeah, and then you're not doing that. Then you can bring somebody on, they're going to come on knowing that, like, okay, I'm going to get treated well by this company, I'm going to get paid well, I might even get some benefits or something like that, and then when I leave, I'm going to be able to take the work I did and at least use it for my own marketing. And I think that would be a very positive thing. So like I said, rather than thinking like you said, oh no, we have to own and control everything, and
Mhm.
that's just a big cost to incur. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's strange seeing the transformation of, like you were saying, the convergence of like kind of VFX and film and with games. I know it's been coming for a long time, but it seems like now every like just looking around on the job boards and things, everything's you need to know Unreal or Unity, uh,
yeah.
on top of being like a character TD and things like that. It's whereas before you might have had like a separate like a technical artist was somebody who specialized in bringing assets into the
Mm.
game engine and that sort of thing. Now it's all like one hat, and you're trying to learn, all these different things. It's pretty wild to stay on top of it all.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting too, because I remember, like, yeah, back in the day, I mean, I think it was when I got my second job in games. Yeah, I was doing character rigs and writing the rigging system and writing our custom environment tools and writing shaders, because back then it was small enough that you could do things like that. But yeah, now it's very specialized, and you even see some folks who are, their job title is technical artist, but you look at the work they're doing, you're like, nah, bro, you're a
That's not what I
software
do.
engineer. Like,
Yeah,
you should go work for Google, man. Like, you know more about Python than like probably 90% of the people there. So
yeah, that's wild. I've known a few people have gone to like work for Apple or like uh, I'm drawing a blank on the name right now, but yeah, some like guys that kind of came up like from the character rigging side and got into like robotics or
yeah.
software development or working for Google, like managing data and things like that. It's
hmm
pretty wild how you could get into an industry like you said, like you weren't really into mathematics or things like that, but you've you sunk your teeth deep enough into like the tech side to build up some chops, and you're an expert in that field now. So it's
Yeah, and it's one of those like, I think having that having that kind of project driven learning where it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe I'm not a math guy, but now that I have a project that shows me how this, like matrices or vector math, it's like, oh wait, I see how these are directly relevant. Okay, now it's interesting, you know. And
oh totally.
and I think to speak to something else you said, like, yeah, I think you're seeing a lot of folks now as companies like Apple and Google and Meta or MetaBook, Facebook, whatever they want to call themselves now, are starting to get into like these, again, these fields that are kind of like sort of bounded by like 3D content creation, like, XR, like, any of this kind of future stuff. They're kind of waking up to the idea that like, oh yeah, we need folks who have game chops because they understand how to build real-time 3D content. So I mean, I guess back to the question of jobs, I think that's another thing is, and this is something I try to encourage people to do is look outside of games, look outside of film, because there are big companies that want your skill set. I mean, and yeah, you won't be working on the next Halo or whatever, but having been in that space now for since about 2012, it's like you'll get to work on some pretty cool stuff. So, and
Yeah, for
and the
sure.
neat thing is, some of it's going to actually go out into the real world. So, for example, I can't say who this was for, but there was a company I worked with that was a big oil and gas company. And you're seeing this a lot now. And what they'll want to do oftentimes is visualize, say, one of their refineries in something like Unity or Unreal, so they can build VR training. So it's kind of cool to do that and then realize like, oh my goodness, this thing is actually out in the world. There's this giant thing that was a total battle to get into Unity because it was bigger than any video game level that's ever been made, is actually out in the real world. And people were trained on this, and now they're going to work on the real thing. It's like that's kind
That's
of
pretty
mind
sick.
blowing. So yeah.
Yeah, man. So you're out in Salt Lake City. How long have you been out there?
A little over 2 years. Moved out here March of 22. So yeah, kind of. I mean, that was kind of when Seattle was sort of at the height of its shutdown, and Unity had gone remote, like everybody else. And I was kind of like, well, let's go somewhere else, and let's see what's out there, since I don't have to be here anymore. And I'd spent most of my adult life in Seattle, so
Right on. So, like, what drew you to Salt Lake City? Was it the outdoors, or was there something about it that drew
yeah,
you out there?
it was one of those, like, I'd been coming out here a lot on and off for events or for talk to customers, and yeah, and it's one of those places. I mean, I'm a big outdoors guy. I grew up camping and all that good stuff. And every time you fly into Salt Lake, you get this just amazing view of the mountains, and you fly over the Great Salt Lake, and you just it's really beautiful. And one of the things people ask me all the time, like when they come visit, or at some point the question is like, do you ever get tired of the view here? It's like, no, sir, I do not.
No,
It's beautiful here. So that, and then cost of living was definitely a big factor. I
sure.
remember when I came out here to kind of sort of find where I was going to live. I remember going to Whole Foods and just kind of buying food for a week, and I was like, wow, that's literally 50% less than what I spend in Seattle. That's amazing. So
And probably way less traffic, I'd imagine, in
yeah,
Seattle.
yeah, it's having lived in the Bay and Seattle and SoCal. Like when I hear people complain about traffic here, or my apartment's right downtown, so so I see the rush hour traffic roll by. I'm like, oh, that's adorable. That's not traffic.
The
So
cars have like 50 feet between them.
yeah, exactly.
They're
So
going the speed limit.
yeah, so
That's
so
cool.
it's
Yeah,
definitely different.
I moved out to North Idaho back in 2013 for kind of the same reasons, but yeah, a lot of it was cost of living, and
Mhm.
back then there wasn't as much remote work, but there was some. I was able to kind of make it by with freelance at the time, and I started working for Magic Leap in 2014,
Yeah.
and they were building their augmented mixed reality stuff, and I got to work remotely for them for a while, which was really
Mhm.
cool. But yeah, now it seems like a lot of studios are returning to office. I know Blizzard. That's one of the
Yeah.
reasons why Blizzard wanted me to move out to Irvine, and I was like,
Mhm.
I can't. My family's here. We're super planted. Yeah, it's. I feel like it's tough now. A lot of studios want hybrid, or they want full return office,
Mhm.
or you might find some remote stuff. But yeah, it's weird, man, going back to that.
Yeah,
But
I think it's even more confusing too, because there's a lot of companies that are like, well, depending on the role, like for example,
right.
Unity, or I know, I mean, I've got a bunch of friends at Epic too, and it's like some of the teams are fully remote, and some of the teams are like, well, we'd like you to be in Cary, or we'd like you to be in Montreal, or so yeah, so
Right. Like, yeah, you could be remote, but you have to be with this location kind of thing.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
tough. I was talking to a buddy of mine on the previous show, and he was mentioning that, like, when you're in like your younger years, maybe your 20s, it's kind of cool to work in an office with people and joke around and like BS all day and like,
Mhm.
do stupid crap and go out to lunch and do all these things. But when you're older, I don't know,
Yeah.
you're kind of your own life. Like the quality of life, I feel like a working remote is just way above and beyond than, um,
Yeah, and it's funny because like for me, I don't really think about it so much, but like some of the hours I work are just bizarre. But it's like, well, yeah, but it's because sometimes I'll need to go do it. I'll need to run take an appointment in the middle of the day, or
mhm,
maybe I just want to go to a jujitsu class at lunch, so I'll just work a little later today, and then maybe put in a
right,
couple hours on the weekends. But yeah, having that freedom to kind of just sort of as long as you get your hours for the weekend, you get your stuff done. It's kind of like, yeah, this is way easier, and it's way nicer, and it's more. I don't know if I'm a fan of the term work life balance, but a term I heard a couple years ago that I really liked was work life integration. So
right.
and I was like, yeah, that makes so much more sense. And yeah, I think being remote, it's so much easier to do something like that. So yeah.
Yeah, how do you typically like do you guys use like Slack or like some kind of like messaging platform to just stay in
Yeah, we're
touch?
we're all about Slack, and that's that. It's funny. That's really the only thing we use. I know a lot of companies I work for. It's like you have Slack and you have like internal forums and all that. But yeah, we pretty much just use Slack. But we're a very small company. My team is 5 people. So
Oh wow.
and
Okay.
interesting because we're scattered, but yeah, we don't really have any problems. I mean, I'm in Salt Lake. The other engineer I work with is in Spain. Kind of our solutions consultant. She's in Montreal. My boss is in sort of the outskirts of LA. So, but yeah, we even with those with the weird time zones, we don't really have an issue. So
Do you guys have like set stand-up meetings that you guys try to all get to, or is it just all just chatting on Slack and
it's all Slack. I mean, and we have a virtual stand up in Slack. So basically, every morning there's just an automation that says, "Hey, post your daily here,"
oh,
and
okay.
and then we just go from there. So
Well, that's pretty cool. Yeah, so you're working on asset management tools and pipeline type
so it's
solutions?
more it's asset management and production tracking. So if you think so, one of the main products we have, F track, is depending on what era you're from, it's either Shotgun or ShotGrid or Flow Production Tracking. It's a competitor
Yeah.
to that from Autodesk. So
Okay.
so it's yeah. So I mean, it's basically you know don't feel like you have to use Google Sheets or Trello or Jira or Microsoft Project anymore. Use software that's purpose built for tracking CG content and digital productions. So yeah,
That's awesome. Yeah, I haven't set up anything major in Shotgun or Shocker, but I've worked in productions that use it. It seems to be a little bit of an animal
hmm
to work with.
yeah.
Um, is how are you guys attacking that? Is it more of like an artist friendly approach, or how would you
So
describe it?
we try to. I think the thing that we do with all of our solutions is the approach we try to take is make sure that it's very extensible. So make sure that if you're a big company and you have the resources to have a TD who can work on it, give them the API tools and the support that they can build it up themselves, or if not, make it simple enough, or that you can convey to us internally what you need, and then somebody like me, like one of the solutions engineers and my buddy Lorenzo, we'll build the solution for you and deliver it. And yeah, and we've actually we've heard from people that's the thing they like about us over ShotGrid, for example, is that like there is that level of very simple extensibility and customization that you can go as either shallow or deep as you want. We have I can't say who, sadly, but we have a very big animation studio that, I mean, they've almost rebuilt a lot of the internals and kind of written custom widgets and UIs just to kind of suit them. But then at the same time, we have little studios that are just like, well, yeah, it's 5 people. We don't have a TD. Can you give us a custom dashboard for this? And we're like, yeah, sure. And they're like, oh yeah, this is great. This is all we need. So, and I think we're a little cheaper than ShotGrid too. And from what I hear, our support is better. So, but that's because it's literally me jumping on a call. So,
That's really cool.
yeah.
So would a typical integration be something like, hey, I have like a modeling or a character rigging pipeline, and I want to kind of integrate my own little publish tool
Mhm.
to maybe automate some asset checks and then
Yep.
run it through some kind of thing,
Yeah.
and then publish it to where it needs to go and notify the proper people,
Yeah, so
keep
it'd be
track of
like,
it.
I'm in Maya, this asset is tied to this shot, so I want to publish this, and then I want to make sure that, that the F track task gets updated with a reviewable and all that good stuff. And then there's a layer where you could say, okay, I also want to make sure that this integrates with say you're doing virtual production using Unreal and Perforce. Okay, I want to make sure that this also gets integrated into Perforce, respects the Perforce versioning, and and also we get an Unreal based delivery. So maybe we record something out of we create a sequencer track and deliver a reviewable out of that too. So it's very, very, very flexible. In fact, I'm starting to work on the new Unreal integration now. So hopefully that'll be cool, which is,
That's awesome.
yeah, and it's interesting too, because, that was one of the topics I was hoping to see more of at SIGGRAPH was virtual production, but that one still feels like everybody has heard about it and everybody's really excited about it. But I mean, case in point, whenever we talk to somebody about, especially using Unreal for virtual production, we're trying to figure out, well, what does your workflow look like, so we know how to track it, in F-Track and from our integration. They're kind of like, well, we're open to suggestions. I'm like, oh, that's what we're asking you for. So they're kind of like, everybody's waiting for, and I know there are studios that are doing it, but I think again, it's one of those, I think a lot of people are waiting for what that standard looks like, kind of what does, say, Unreal based virtual production look like, from a BKP standpoint, so we all at least have an idea of where to start from. So
If you had to describe that, because I'm not too familiar with that virtual production, like how would you kind of break that down, like just the basic idea of it?
yeah, I mean, it's so I mean, you think about like what they did on was it which star was it Rogue One? Because ILM was using like LED volumes and LED walls
Sure.
to put up a lot of virtual content, and to put up like digital backgrounds that were authored in Unreal, for example, and that's their set now versus like having to go on location or green screen. So I mean, I think I mean, in on one level, it's another way of integrating digital and live. But I think there's you're doing such high fidelity digital content now that's actually generating your final pixels. So
Oh, cool.
that's kind of one of the ways I would put it. So
Right
yeah,
on.
so it's like, yeah, it's like real time compositing on steroids, I guess. But again, that's kind of an oversimplification. But yeah, that actually, I know Epic. So if you saw the Fallout series that was on Prime,
Mhm.
I think Magnopus posted a really cool write up on Epic's website about how they did a lot of their stuff. So
Oh, cool. I have to check that out.
yeah.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, man. So outside of CG and all this cool nerdy stuff, you have all sorts of badass stuff going on. Like I
Yeah.
saw, I don't even know where to start with any. You have so much stuff going on. But you're doing a guitar collaboration with like some other artists. Is that?
So it's actually with a brand. There's one of the things I did when I started playing guitar a couple years ago, because when COVID happened, rather than decide to day drink or bake sourdough bread like most people did, I was like, you know what, I've been wanting to learn guitar for a while, so let's just do that. And I was always a fan of kind of independent guitar. I still am, of like independent luthiers and guitar builders, because they do really cool stuff. And so I was always like following these, like a lot of these companies on Instagram. And yeah, and
Uh,
then one of them just reached out to me and was like, hey, we're looking for folks to do brand collabs with, and looking for sponsored artists, and we like your stuff, so if you're interested. And I was like, yeah, sure, if you're gonna send me free guitars, okay, like that's cool.
that's
So yeah.
insane, man. What
Yeah.
brand is it? Can you say?
It's a brand called I can spell it. I don't know how to pronounce it. I can spell it. It's KONONYKHEN.
Let me look this
They're
up. So these things look pretty badass. They're like kind of
yeah,
strat style guitars, would you say,
yeah,
or
kind of
all sorts
Strat,
of
like
stuff?
offset Surfliner kind of looking stuff. Like yeah,
That's
and
pretty
I'm a huge
awesome.
fan of offsets. So yeah.
What's an offset guitar? Because I'm not familiar with that term.
Let me see. I should have a bunch. Oh, so if you think of like a Fender Jazzmaster or an Explorer, where it's like so a Strat is pretty symmetrical, but
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's check it. I love
what are my
guitars, man.
baritones? Oh no, camera, don't be weird. There we
Oh,
go.
we got you
So
back.
yeah, so if you notice that, like, this is there's kind of this offset here, so it's not quite a Tele or a Strat, because a Tele or a Strat would be more symmetrical. So
Right.
and if you look at the bottom, it's kind of got same thing, like you got kind of this sort of swoop here. So yeah,
That thing looks pretty gnarly. So is that like a
great.
27
This is a 30 actually. So
30?
I mean, I can tune this down to like, I think this one's actually in drop D0, so it's like an octave below drop D. So it's pretty much a bass guitar. Like, let's be honest. But yeah,
That's insane, man.
yeah, I'm a huge fan of like a lot of that kind of the modern metal, like all the super down tuned, like genty stuff, Meshuggah and all that, and Animals as leaders, and yeah. So
Yeah, I've got Meshuggah. It's like even back in the day, some of their was it Future Breed Machine? Was that
yeah,
right? I
Yeah,
love that album, man.
that's a
Like,
great album.
yeah. But yeah, sometimes it's hard for me to listen to because I love like a repeating groove, but with Meshuggah, it's like there's always something changing
Yeah,
on
I mean, if
each.
you want to drive yourself crazy, just try and count any Meshuggah song, and yeah, you'll be talking to God eventually. So yeah.
Yeah, I saw an interview with Thomas Hag, is that
Yep.
his name?
Yeah.
And he was
Yep.
saying, like, technically it's all 4/4, but I guess just the way they, just I don't know what he was saying.
Yeah.
I'm not super like educated in that
I
yet.
think what it is like everything resolves to four over a long. So Future Breed Machine. Okay, well we're gonna get like really deep and nerdy here, but
Okay.
that song, a spasm, you know, like, you know. So
Yeah.
it's the lower riff is in seven, and the top riff is in four or six. So there's two riffs. So eventually, so it resolves in like 42 measures, right?
Oh,
So
I
it's like,
see.
yeah, it's in four eventually, you know. So
Yeah, I couldn't imagine how those guys play a show with,
yeah.
like retaining all that and even just, yeah, that's
Yeah,
really
and I
phenomenal.
read somewhere that they don't play with a click track either, some which I guess makes sense, but it's just like that's inhuman. Like I don't even know how you do that.
Yeah, I'd hate to be the guy to program that click track, because holy
Yeah,
crap.
right.
Yeah, they're just freaks of humans that are able to do that for sure. I think I usually typically get into more of like the thrashy, like
Mhm.
technical thrash. There's this band Havoc I like a
Yeah.
lot. They're really tight, and the guitarist is, reminiscent of like the old Megadeth, Metallica,
Mhm.
um, Dimebag Darrell stuff that I like a lot.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of the classics, man, or I mean, can't go wrong with Megadeth. Like, I mean, I love those guys for sure. Like that's actually one of the reasons I even got into metal was one of my friends played Rust in Peace for me back in like
Oh yeah,
when it came out in like in '92, and just like I mean, just like just the intro to Holy Wars, just like I didn't even think that was possible. Oh my god, like so yeah.
yeah. I think that's probably one of the top metal albums. Like those solos, Martin Freeman, like Tornado of Souls.
Yeah,
That's like one of the tops, man. And I still try to learn it. I've been trying to learn that solo for like 10 years,
yeah,
probably. I still can't get it right, but
yep,
it's a fun challenge.
yeah.
Um,
It's kind of a metal guitarist rite of passage, right? Like, yeah, can you play like Tornado of Souls? Yeah.
yeah, that's just sick. Like that, the end of that is kind of just Marty. He's probably just playing something kind of random in his mind that makes some sort of sense, but then to try to learn it,
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
it's pretty mind-boggling for sure. Yeah, man. So, and then how long have you been doing jujitsu for?
Um, that's a good question. I mean, on and off. Like, so I started in 2014, but I mean, there's been like whole years where I've only trained like once a week, or just because of where I was or work or stuff like that. So I mean, if I had to like give a number as far as like just to kind of quantify my skill level, I'd say I probably have about 5 years of good consistent practice. So I don't mind saying I'm a pretty mid blue belt. So
Oh,
yeah.
nice. That's awesome. I've been at about 2 years, and
Mhm.
I'm a super slow learner when it comes to it. I can watch somebody do a move and I kind of understand the concept, but then when I try to get my body to do those things, it just ain't
Yeah.
happening. There's like a
Yeah.
lack of coordination on my part. Do you struggle with any of that stuff, or is it pretty natural for you?
It sort of depends. Like, yeah, when I started, definitely because, well, first, I mean, when I started, I was much heavier than I am now and much less flexible. But I think now, just because it's one of those things that I kind of keep in my head a lot. Like, so even like the times I wasn't training consistently, I was always watching jujitsu videos, watching like, BJJ Fanatics DVDs. So I think just having that in your head is really helpful. So
Right.
now, like, yeah, I can go into any gym and, watch, say the craziest 10th planet flow, for example, or some of the stuff that like the new wave guys, Donaher and his kids are doing. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I get what you're doing. Okay, I could, give me like 5 minutes and I could do that. But again, that's just like, having enough time on the mat. And I think like when you go to a gym like 10th planet, some of the stuff they do is just you're just like, why would you do that? That's just silly. But you do it anyway. And if you have a good coach, they'll actually explain to you why, and then you'll hit it in a row and be like, oh, okay, I see why you do that. So I think there's a difference between like say that and say like well, I don't want to name names, just but there's the other gyms where it's like, okay, well, for the first 6 months you're just going to learn fundamentals, like escape from side control, escape from mount, and I
Right.
think that's valuable, but I think I think people can learn faster than that. So there's this guy now, Greg Souders is his name, and he's been looking into. So if you've ever heard the term the ecological approach, which is basically, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it's basically task-based learning. So instead of if showing people like a specific move, what you say is, so like one of the drills they do a lot is for guard retention. So you'll have, a guy start standing and you'll have a guy start kind of in open guard. And what you tell the guy on the bottom is, okay, your whole goal is just to like get your hooks onto the standing players, behind the knees, behind the ankles. That's your whole goal. Like, don't worry about trying to do a specific technique, just work on that. And then the standing guy, it's like, yeah, try and strip the hooks. And so what you're doing is, rather than giving somebody a technique, you're saying, okay, well, here are all the things, in the ecology around that specific technique that you need to have first before you can get to the technique. So
That's really cool.
we're gonna show you all the inputs, and then at some point, what'll happen is you'll be close enough to doing a technique that then I can just say, okay, let me just refine what you just did there, and that's a single leg X entry, or that's an Ashi entry. I was like, oh, but all you were doing was just trying to like retain guard, for example. You were just trying to accomplish a very specific task that wasn't do a single leg X entry. And so a lot of the gyms, like two of the gyms that I've trained with recently, so the gym I train with now, for example, that's pretty much how we do everything. And it's interesting because you see these kids who come in fresh, and then in 6 months they're just smashing people, and you're like, how did you learn that in 6 months? But it's like, oh, but then you look at how they drill, it's like, oh, okay, because now it's almost like an opposite approach, right? It's like you've learned all the ways you get into a movement, or what you would have to deal with, trying to do a movement, versus learning the specific movement and then saying, okay, how do I apply this? So you've learned all the boilerplate for the application, and then when it comes down to it, so you've answered all those questions, and so you know how to pass guard, how to like get to shin to shin, how to get like hooks, your hooks, and then, which, like I said, I think is the hard part. And then when you get to the point where you're just applying the specific technique, that's easy because, like I said, you've already like dealt with all the hard stuff. So
That's really cool. Yeah,
interesting.
I found like when you're learning a technique, it's like, okay, I kind of understand this, but then when you go live roll, it all like it's out
Yeah.
the window. At least for me,
Yeah. And I think it's like that for a lot of people, because like I said, you get to the point where you're like, right, but how did I get here? It's like, okay, yeah, so I've got to the specific point where, yes, I can, I can do my triangle setup or whatever. I can do my armbar setup, but it's all the other stuff around that. Like it's actually getting to where, okay, now I can pull the trigger on that I think we don't give people. And we just say, oh yeah, just go figure it out in a live roll, which, I mean, you might feel this the same way, but for me, I was just like, yeah, I suck at jujitsu. There's just no way I'm going to figure that out. But then doing this ecological stuff, it's like, oh, well, now I get it. So I have to do all these 5 things first. And if I can just get to those, then I can pull the trigger. It's like, oh, all right. Yeah, that makes way more sense. So
that's awesome.
yeah.
Do you think of jujitsu like in like a logical kind of flow chart way, like in your
Yeah.
mind, almost like a procedural type thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of one of the neat things about the 10th Planet system is, so my coach, he actually had at one of his gyms, he has a gym out in Thailand, and they actually have like this flow chart of like, okay, well, you start in half guard, you get to lockdown. Okay, from lockdown, you can go to, and so being able to like think about it that way, I think is really cool. And having it visualize that is great, because you're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, now this is an aid for me to start thinking, X moves ahead of where I am now. So
Yeah,
I think that's the other thing that coming from a technique based approach was tough for me, because it was like, it's easy to say, okay, so from this move, I do this next move, and then I do this next move, but without having, again, kind of like having sort of, understanding what the environment is like, it was hard for me to say, oh yeah, but if he does this, I need to be able to do, like, I need to have these 3 other things on tap just in case. But, now I start to understand that more when, when you're saying, okay, well, rather than the specific movements, like, again, what's kind of the scaffolding, what's the situation around those movements that I'm going to have to worry about. So
that's really cool.
yeah.
Think about it. What drew you to jujitsu and Muay Thai and combat sports? Is it just part of
um
your soul, or like what do you
Sort
think it
of.
is?
I mean, I was that nerdy kid back in the 80s whose parents put him in a taekwondo class, and I just fell in love with it. So I've been doing martial arts for a while. But how I specifically got into combat sports is funny. I was doing another martial art called Kajukenbo, which is a self defense style. Like it's a little bit like Krav Maga. It's a little bit like kind of some like Kempo. I mean, in fact, Kempo I think is one of the martial arts that fed into it. And the guy I was training with at the time was a striking coach for the Gracies at one point when they were really big into MMA. And one of the components of Kajukenbo is grappling, and we didn't do it enough in class that I ever caught onto it. And I was just like, yeah, I'm just never going to get this stuff. So I figured, okay, well, I need to just go learn jujitsu. And he had been a 10th Planet guy too. So he was like, oh yeah, go learn from 10th Planet. And so there were a bunch of 10th, at the time I was living in Northern California. So there were a bunch of 10th Planets, none that were practical for me to get to. So I was like, oh. Mm-hmm. But about a month after he said that, there was one that opened. So I was in San Jose at the time, and there was one that opened in San Mateo. So it's funny, I was actually the first student to sign up there, and it was just like every nerd assassin who does jujitsu, like the first couple months you're just like, oh my god, this is amazing. And so I was kind of off to the races there, and then Muay Thai kind of happened by accident, I guess. It was one of those things that again, because my coach was an MMA guy, so we did some not really Muay Thai, we did a lot of kickboxing. And then there was a gym in Seattle that I went to. It was a Renzo Gracie gym that also had a Muay Thai coach. And this guy is like legit, like from Thailand. Was one of those guys who had 100 fights by the time he was 15 years old, sort of thing.
Right.
And he was only like 25 when he came to the U.S. So he was an old man in Muay Thai at the time, right? But so originally I just did it because I like striking arts just for fun. It's great exercise. But it was one of those things like, wow, this is really cool. And then when I started training in Muay Thai at 10th Planet here in Salt Lake, it just kind of came up that the IKF has these point events now, these point technicals that are no knockout, just kind of very very they're really fun. I mean, to be honest, they're probably not any harder than a normal sparring round you would do in class. And
crazy. Okay.
My coach just texted me and he's like, hey, and I'd been out of training for probably about 2 weeks because of work. He's like, hey, are you coming back to the gym sometime? Like, we have some fights coming up if you're interested. And I was like, sure, I don't have a reason not to, so why not? And
did you get nervous? Like, when you feel yourself getting? So I know when I get excited about something, I want to commit to it. That it's right after that, I'm like, oh shit, what did I do?
Yeah, a little bit, but at the same time, it was kind of like I was kind of excited to do it anyway because it was something that I wanted to do. Because we had a couple other guys in the gym at the time who had already been doing a lot of fights, and they were always trying to peer pressure the rest of us to do fights. It was like, no, it's cool, it's super fun, like you'll love it, like it's not that hard. And so they had kind of built it up for us. So I was like, yeah, sure, why not? Let's go do that. And it was cool, So back in March, I had my first ever Muay Thai fight, and it was a good time. And hopefully, I'm gonna do another one in October. So we'll see.
That's insane. So what was your training like leading up to the fight?
It really wasn't much different, and I think that kind of speaks to just the efficacy of our coach because we only have 3 classes a week. But he's such a good coach that he was able to give us all specific things, and he's done. I mean, he has a record. He's fought for years, and he's been to a lot of these events. So so he has that coach's eye for fighting, and so he was so good at saying, okay, you need to work on this specific thing, and here's a combo that I want you to try, and here's something I want you to think about, and it was so specific to how each one of us fought that we just worked on that. And then, when we went into the actual like matches, it was just like, oh yeah, that thing you said, that you're right, that works. So I think that's kind of what it was just having a really good coach, and then just having, just having really good kind of teammates too. Cause I think the other thing is one of our classes, every Saturday, we have basically an open mat, so we just show up and spar for 2 hours. But the way he has us approach sparring is he says, remember that thing that I told you to work on, make that your goal. Don't worry about trying to win the round, trying to get points, try and land that thing, figure out what all your entries are, figure out figure out what the ecology is like and just work on that. And so that's what a lot of us do. And it's kind of neat because, at least all the folks on the fight team, that's the way we kind of approach things. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to work on this one thing. You're going to work on this other thing. I know that, and you know that, but it's still work because you don't know how to deal with it immediately. So not only you get to work on the thing that you're trying to fix, you get a specific thing from another fighter to kind of try and counter. So, and personally, I don't know. I think for me, that's been such a good way to learn because, I've been in other striking gyms where it's just like, nah, just go in and beat on each other. And it's like, well, okay, that's fun, but I don't know if that's going to teach me that much. So.
Yeah, that's nuts. Did you have to make weight or anything for your fight, or was it
I mean, we did, but it was such a small event that I don't think anybody really cared. I mean,
Hmm.
I mean, I took the fight at 180, and yeah, I think the guy I fought, I mean, he had to have been 10 pounds, 10, 15 pounds heavier than me. Or for example, we have a guy in our gym that's just this giant of a man. He's like 6'8", I think 230 when he cuts
Good
it.
Lord, dude.
Yeah, and the guy he fought was almost literally half his size. I mean, like for example, when so the guy's name is Josh. When he teeped the guy, like he was almost teeping him in the face and not even like having to lift his leg up. It was just like we're just like,
And that's
and
that front kick that like Sean
yeah,
Strickland
the
does,
push
like
kick,
this.
yeah. And it's
Yeah.
funny because we all saw that and we're all laughing. It's like, yeah, we have to deal with that every Saturday for 2 hours. How does it feel? So like,
In
yeah,
the face.
yeah, exactly. So
That's nuts, man. That's crazy. How do you manage all your time between, work, guitar, jujitsu, fitness? I know
yeah,
you're training with weights. You're doing mobility stuff.
yeah.
You're a
I
coach,
mean,
I think.
well, not I've taken a little bit of a step back from the coaching just because there's just so many other things I'm trying to do now. But a lot of
Right.
it, I mean, again, back to that whole idea of work life integration, right? I mean, I'm very lucky that I've that my schedule is basically, hey, here's kind of a high level idea of a date we would like something delivered. So if you can just hit that date, do whatever you need to do. So,
That's
so
awesome. I
like I
love
said,
that,
my
man.
days are a little odd. And then, I mean, I don't, my times for, I don't really, I don't have a family. I don't have kids. I don't have, I don't really have a girlfriend or anything. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, I'm just going to just go do whatever I want to do.
That's the
So yeah,
secret.
so don't ask me for life advice because I don't have it.
Oh, you got plenty going on, man. That's all amazing stuff. Well, dude, I won't keep you forever. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I don't know, it's just cool getting to know you on this level and sharing your stuff with everybody out there. And people are gonna find it super interesting. And yeah, it's been an honor,
Yeah.
man. Thanks for
Yeah,
taking the
well, for
time.
sure. I mean, good luck on your career. Like I said, I think this is great, and I think I'm kind of definitely interested to see like when you start putting out coursework, to see what that looks like. So yeah, man.
Yeah, that's the goal too, for sure.